US and Singapore mark 55 years of bilateral relations. How has this partnership helped Singapore's growth through the years?
The American multinationals play a very important role in the 1960s and 70s.
Almost every skyline that you see of Singapore today will feature MBS.
What are the partnerships on the security front?
The US terrain is extremely vast, and we're able to stage large-scale exercises there.
With anti-globalization forces rising in the US, can it still be counted on as an investor and trading partner?
Trade is not a good word in the United States now.
And as tensions increase between US and China, how will it impact our bilateral relations?
The existential imperative is we must make ourselves relevant.
Singapore in 1965, a third world country with poor infrastructure and limited capital. If Singapore was ever going to shake off its third world status and feed its biggest resource, its people, it needed to create jobs, and fast.
When we became independent, the economic situation was quite dire. And GDP per capita about US $500 at a time. So we needed to grow the economy.
Capital and technology-intensive multinational companies were lured to Singapore by the business-friendly policy. Some of the heavy hitters of the petroleum industry, such as Mobil, arrived to refine their oil products locally, bringing knowledge and know-how.
Mobil started in 1966. Exxon came in 2-3 years later. So today, ExxonMobil are the biggest investors in the oil and gas.
We attracted MNCs, and some of the early MNCs were American companies. They basically put their trust and their faith in us, which also in turn then gave other investors the confidence to come to Singapore and say, hey, let's do business here and let's succeed here together.
By the 1970s, Singapore became a magnet for foreign investors, with multinational companies blazing the trail for the rapid industrialization. Gross domestic product, the GDP, rocketed from -3% in 1964 to almost 14% by 1970. Philip Yeo traveled to the US every month to convince companies of Singapore's efficiency as a manufacturing base.
The American multinationals play a very important role in the 1960s and 70s because they brought electronics. Prior to that, our investments in Singapore were garments, textiles, but the key were the semiconductor companies, followed by disk drive, in addition to the oil companies. They create a lot of jobs.
By the 80s, Singapore had become the world's leading producer of hard disk drives and jack-up oil rigs. It also started manufacturing computers for American MNCs like HP and Apple. In the 90s, Micron, an American memory chip manufacturer, established its presence here.
Micron established its Singapore presence in 1998 after acquiring an assembly and test facility in Bendemeer and a joint venture 8-inch wafer fabrication plant in Woodlands. This is the heart of our manufacturing facilities. The clean room is the size of 8 football fields and is columnless. The production line is fully automated. Hundreds of our state-of-the-art equipment are arranged neatly, quietly processing away. All these automated machinery work together to produce memory chips. In almost every devices or gadget in the electronic world has some kind of memory in it. Our products can be found in computers, mobile phones, solid-state drives, digital cameras, gadgets that is used almost every day.
In terms of Micron, they are all assembly components, and we created a support industry. All the local suppliers of components, engineering, supplies, logistics, all Singapore companies. So it's more than just a product. It creates a value chain of jobs here.
The electronics sector in Singapore is about 8.5% of GDP, so it's quite big. If you look at companies like HP, Seagate, Micron, they have not just invested more, but the depth and sophistication of their economic activities has grown. So we're not just building disk drive components, we're not doing R&D.
The presence of companies like Micron, HP and Seagate has provided jobs for thousands of skilled engineers. Micron, for example, has more than 8,600 staff.
Our innovations fuel the data economy in key growth markets, enabling advances in key areas including artificial intelligence to 5G application. Our data center focus serves cloud service provider customers as well as traditional enterprise compute environments. In 1998, I was the Director of Operations in the wafer fabrication plant. Over the years, Micron presence in Singapore comprises multiple mega fabrication plants in 2 locations and 1 assembly and test facility which serve as the base for Micron's worldwide operations. I'm proud to be part of Micron's journey.
The early 2000s saw the world's biggest cities vie for the tourism dollar. Dubai was transforming itself to make the desert city a mecca for travelers. London's skyline was undergoing a startling makeover to turn it into the go-to city in Europe. Hong Kong had unveiled its own Disneyland to pull in the tourists. Singapore wasn't in the race. In just under a decade, tourism's contribution to Singapore's GDP had fallen by almost half. There was a need for new tourist attractions because the existing ones were not so exciting.
Welcome to the world of Chinese mythology. Hopper Villa?
Dragon World.
Haw Par Villa had been built way back in 1937. Then there was Tang Dynasty City. It closed in 1999. Sentosa had the Asian Village and Fantasy Island water theme park. It too closed.
For the good management
in his first public rally since being appointed Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong unveiled a bold new plan.
An integrated resort, entertainment center. So you have shows, you have family entertainment, you have food, restaurants, art, all sorts of things.
The government called for proposals for integrated resorts, and developers were invited to create 2 new self-funding commercial villages for the city. One downtown at Marina Bay and the other on Sentosa Island. American company Las Vegas Sands Corporation was awarded the Marina Bay license.
We decided to throw our original concept out and start all over again. And so I think it was November 15th of 2005 that the RFP was issued. And it was subsequent to that date that we actually retained Moshe Safdie and began to create a whole new design and a brand new plan for the integrated resort for Marina Bay. And so we were really hustling at that point to get everything pulled together in a short amount of time.
Israeli-American architect Moshe Safdie was renowned worldwide for the dramatic curves and geometric patterns in his work. Safdie also championed inclusive spaces that enhanced the sense of community in his designs. True to form, Moshe Safdie's design for the Marina Bay Waterfront included 3 curved towers and a sky park sitting on top of them the size of an aircraft carrier.
Well, we put ourselves on a pretty tight timetables, so the pressure of schedule was certainly one aspect of it, but the conditions in which we were building reclaimed land, which was a different type of environment than typical, marine clay and various conditions that made the design very difficult, so we had to have the world's top engineers to come up with the design. And then the construction process was quite complicated because we're digging down into the marine clay as we were building up into the sky using fast-track construction techniques.
The Marina Bay Sands project completely transformed the skyline of downtown Singapore.
Almost every skyline that you see of Singapore today will feature MBS, and it's a beautiful skyline, and it brings us attention from the world over. But I would say also MBS has made a significant contribution to the programming part, the software part. If you think about conventions, for example, significantly increased our convention space, and as a result of that, we've been able to bring many world-class conventions into Singapore. And you have also events, for example, quite a few years ago, there was the launch of the Marvel Cinematic Universe under Disney, when you had the stars come down.
Whether it was in the 60s, 80s, or 2000s, the American partnership transformed a part of Singapore's economy.
The business partnership, the econ partnership, is truly impressive here. We have 4,500 US companies in Singapore. Believe it or not, they employ 200,000 people in this country. The trade relationship between the United States and Singapore has doubled since we signed the free trade agreement in 2004. It's the longest FTA that we have here in Asia. And that trade partnership helps create over 200,000 jobs in the United States. So job creation is very strong in both countries.
Even in the midst of the pandemic, American companies continue to partner Singapore in its innovation and digital initiatives.
Google and the government are joining forces in a high-tech jobs boost. 3,000 Singaporeans are to be offered jobs and skills training and certification in digital marketing and cloud technology.
Dell is investing more than $65 million in its new research and development center here in Singapore.
Amazon will launch its first renewable energy project in Singapore next year.
Procter & Gamble is expanding its research and development capabilities into baby care with the launch of its first baby care innovation lab in Singapore.
The US semiconductor giant Global Foundries is setting up a new wafer fab plant here in Singapore. The project is worth over 5 billion Singapore dollars and will add 1,000 new jobs.
America has more invested in Singapore than it has invested in India, China, and Korea combined. I mean, many people are often surprised at that.
About 80% of US FDI in ASEAN is right here in Singapore. So it's really, truly impressive.
The US is the single source of investments in Singapore, the stock of investment in Singapore, by quite a wide margin, and also the single source of flows of investment in Singapore by quite a wide margin. Statistically, today, the stock of investments from US companies, it's about $430 Singapore billion. The flows average over the last 5 years has been about 16-17% of our annual flows, US companies. And that's more than twice that of the second ranked one, which is China. It's a big, very, very, very big relationship, economic relationship that needs to be nurtured, cannot be taken for granted, and I think needs to be built upon.
In 1990, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and US Vice President Dan Quayle signed a Memorandum of Understanding regarding the American use of facilities in Singapore. The MOU is still in place today.
When the Cold War ended, late 80s, the Philippines decided that they wanted the Americans to leave Clark and Subic. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was categorical that America should not disengage from Southeast Asia, despite the fact that the Cold War had ended. That's why the Memorandum of Understanding in 1990 came about.
The MOU supported the US in maintaining their security presence in Asia. This in turn contributed significantly to maintaining peace and stability in the region and towards an environment conducive for economic growth and development among the regional countries.
Since then, the US-Singapore defense cooperation has gone from strength to strength. Amidst the pandemic, the Singapore Navy prepares to join the 2020 Rim of the Pacific exercise. Also known as RIMPAC, it's hosted by the US Navy and is the world's largest multinational maritime warfare exercise that takes place every 2 years.
My main role is to bring the ship out safely, conduct our missions, and then bring the crew back safely to their families. So for this exercise, RIMPAC, right, is the Rim of the Pacific exercise hosted by the United States Navy. We'll be deploying for a total of about 10 weeks from Singapore headed to Hawaii, where the exercise will be conducted.
The 2020 RIMPAC includes 20 ships from 10 participating countries with 5,300 personnel. Since 2008, Singapore has been participating in RIMPAC. The exercise is conducted off the waters of Hawaii. The vast expanse of the training area allows the Singapore Navy to operate and train in waters that are over 400 times the total land area of Singapore.
The US terrain is extremely vast, and we're able to do large-scale exercises in very, very realistic training settings, and that's of great value to us. All these exercises allow us to deepen the not only professional exchanges with them, allows us to learn more about them and learn from one another. It allows us to deepen also our people-to-people ties, and I think that's invaluable to us.
At RIMPAC 2020, RSS Supreme takes on the role of commanding a task group, leading 3 other warships in a variety of exercises. She's also the Sea Combat Commander, directing 8 other ships from 7 nations to carry out anti-surface and anti-submarine drills.
One of the main challenge that I face as the Commander Task Group as well as the Sea Combat Commander is really how we integrate the multilateral force into one single fighting entity within a short period of time. We were able to showcase our leadership to take charge of the multilateral force and to demonstrate our strength.
The Sea Combat Commander battle staff definitely integrated well with the ship, and I think this was evident from the very positive feedback that we received not only from the US, the Koreans, as well as all our subordinate units.
Another important exercise is the firing of the Astor missile. The Astor is designed to intercept a wide range of air threats, such as anti-ship missiles and aircraft.
During the firing, I'm the anti-air warfare officer, and this entails making sure that the team is ready and execute the plan during the firing.
A drone simulating a high-speed sea-skimming target is launched by the United States Navy. The Singapore Navy tracks its move and brings it down.
The ship has achieved a significant milestone today, having to fire an Astor missile and hit the target successfully proves that we remain operational ready even through a pandemic.
The US is a very professional Navy. Gave us a chance to benchmark ourselves, to hone our own skills with them. And over time, the other thing that we developed with the US Navy is something that's called interoperability, the ability to interoperate closely with them. A very clear sign of this is the fact that we are now able to land our helicopters on their ships, their helicopters on ours. Our ships are able to maneuver close to the US ships and take on fuel, for example, when we're at sea. So these are complicated maneuvers that you only build up over a long span of time. having that common understanding, I think then allows us to reach out and do more activities together that help to enhance, in our view, regional peace and security. There are many scenarios that we think about. One of them is humanitarian and disaster relief, because things like that tend to happen at very short notice. The more assets and ships that you can put together to the area, I think the more effective you are.
An F-15 squadron trains and flies with American pilots at the Mountain Home Air Base in Idaho. The Singapore team has been here for 12 years. This is one of 3 training detachments in the US.
In Singapore, we are constrained primarily by airspace. The benefits training in the US come from the large airspace. We're able to do overland operations, low-level operations. There are electronic warfare threat emitters that we can train to. So with this, we're able to keep all our aircrew at a very high level of tactical competency.
Lieutenant Colonel Kim flies both the F-15 and F-16 planes. And he's learned from pilots who've been in the thick of battle.
Their pilots have combat experience from a theater such as Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're able to take all that experience and share that with us. So we found that it was an exponential learning curve, and that we were able to pick up the specifics of the aircraft very quickly.
Which foreign country has more troops training on American soil than even NATO countries? And the answer, surprisingly, is Singapore.
Details of an Air Force training detachment in Guam were also announced. The deal with the US was signed in December, and it's set to be ready by 2029.
The airspace there is more than 80 times the size of Singapore. The RSAF plans to deploy its F-15s, F-16s and supporting assets.
Guam, the training airspace there is vast, so that makes it very suitable for us to send our pilots as well as aircrew there to hone their combat capabilities. In fact, because Guam is an island, besides just training on the air combat side, we are also able to do integrated training with our Navy. Guam is a lot closer to Singapore than the continental US. The travel distance and time is a lot shorter, and that gives us greater flexibility when we deploy people and aircraft there.
Counter-terrorism is another aspect of the bilateral partnership. Singapore contributed assets and people to support the defeat of the ISIS coalition in the Middle East.
Terrorism is a global threat. We have been participating in the fight against the ISIS since 2014. And our primary aim was to keep Singapore safe. So we supported through many ways, with imagery analysts, with medical teams, with counter-terrorism training units, even air refueling tankers. What this did is that it allowed us also to gain tremendous operational experience. We've just recently established the Counter-Terrorism Information Facility. This allows us to share intelligence amongst regional countries, gives us early warning of certain indicators of certain things that are happening in the region, and allows us to tackle these terrorist threats early. The US is a key partner nation in the Counter-Terrorism Information Facility.
27th July 2021. United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's visit to Singapore is seen as an affirmation of the importance of Southeast Asia and Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. The trip to the region is a first by a top member of the Biden administration. Singapore is his first stop, followed by Vietnam and then the Philippines.
I'm here to represent a new American administration, but also to reaffirm our enduring American commitments. And above all, I want to talk about the strategic imperative of partnership. I learned a core lesson over 4 decades as a soldier in peace and in war. And that lesson is that nobody can go it alone, at least not for very long. We are far stronger and for far longer when we come together than when we let ourselves be split apart. And the United States and this region are more secure and more prosperous when we work together with our allies and partners.
With domestic political forces sometimes threatening to split America apart, can the US be counted on to work with its partners in this age of rising populism?
We are the majority, and Trump won.
6 January 2021. A mob of US President Donald Trump's supporters stormed the Capitol building and unleashed unprecedented scenes of mayhem.
They broke the glass.
Members of Congress were meeting at the time to certify the electoral vote count from the presidential election.
We're all American!
5 people died in the Capitol riot.
January 6th was viewed by me and by everyone in Asia, I think, with a disbelief and shock. The United States is, after all, the leading country, the leading democracy of the world, if not the most, and certainly the most powerful. This was not what we expected to see.
The event was the dramatic climax of 4 years of the Trump presidency.
It is important to understand what President Trump represented. He, in a sense, epitomized the anxiety, the concern of a very significant segment of the American domestic political opinion. Let's take a step back. After the end of the Second World War, in fact, the real clear winner was the United States. It was 40% of the global GDP. But the United States now is about a quarter of global GDP. So it's still big, but it's not the big behemoth that it used to be. Next point is that the rise of China has presented the United States with an unprecedented peer power, meaning one that is almost as strong, almost as big, has similar depths of technological expertise. This is a contest which America has never faced. And then you add the domestic elements within the United States. People's anxieties, especially in the Rust Belt, about globalization, about free trade, about competition. So you end up with a rather complicated and sometimes volatile mix, which has resulted in a rather polarized America.
So when Trump took power in 2017, one of the first things he did was to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The TPP would have covered 40% of the global economy, as the members represent a market of 800 million people with a combined GDP of $27.5 trillion.
It was a great disappointment for all the partners of TPP. Trade is not a good word in the United States now because there are so many constituencies that see themselves having lost out in trade. The workers, the middle class.
Prime Minister Lee, in a piece for Foreign Affairs magazine in August last year, he highlighted, in fact, that the TPP wasn't just important because of the economic gains from it, but also because of its broader strategic objectives or its broader strategic outcomes, namely that it would increase cooperation between countries that sign up to it. It would give them a stake in each other's economic and broader futures, and it would help to shape the regional architecture, including the rules-based trading system. So for those reasons, I think the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement was very important for Asia.
In 2018, Trump started a trade war with China.
Now, Singapore is prepared for the negative consequences of a prolonged trade war between China and the United States.
As Singaporean businesses adjusted to the new challenges posed by the trade war, the pandemic hit. America, already divided over politics, was further polarized by the pandemic. As death rates rose and conspiracy theories spread, emotions reached a fever pitch during a divisive election.
Democracy in its implementation is always a work in progress. Western analysts, thinkers are saying that the democracy there needs reform. Democracy has degraded. The democratic institutions are not functioning the way they are doing. But that doesn't mean democracy is no good. It's just that you've got to remake the model, reform the model. So I can see some countries in Asia, in Southeast Asia, saying, well, do I want that model? But, there's no counting and for, the value of rule of law, accountability in government, and a respect for human rights.
The United States is 245 years old. So if I dare say, on the eve of our 250th birthday, we are humble enough to recognize our imperfections, to work on them, and to continually strive for a more perfect union. At the same time, we are confident enough to lead. So let me tell you what I've seen over the past few months. I have seen the United States vaccinate about 70% of its adult population already. I have seen the United States rejoin the Paris Accord on day one of the Biden administration. I have seen the United States putting diplomacy at the very heart of our foreign policy and making re-engaging and reinvigorating our alliances a top priority.
Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus.
In January this year, President Biden was inaugurated. While the United States retreated from the international stage under Trump, Biden promised to work more closely with allies. 6 months after taking power, President Biden, together with leaders of the G7, announced a vast global infrastructure plan called Build Back Better World, also known as the B3W.
The B3W, Build Back Better World, recognizes that the infrastructure needs of the world are such that no one government can handle them on its own. So we need multiple countries, and above all, we need healthy public-private partnerships. And that's what we seek with ASEAN.
The Build Back Better World, that's meant to fill an infrastructure and development gap in the developing world, which has been assessed at around $40 trillion US. And it's really the West's response or riposte to China's Belt and Road Initiative. We have rather few details of the Build Back Better World. What we do know about it is that it's meant to be focused on climate change, digital technology, health, as well as gender equity, as well as border equality. We also know that it's going to be seeking to mobilize private sector investment to push for funding to the developing world.
Certainly the world needs infrastructure. Singapore's attitude and my attitude is that certainly, why not? You know, there is a crying need for infrastructure and anyone can play. And if you go to the next step, would Singapore help to participate? We've worked together with the United States to help third countries, and I'm sure we can do that, but we've got to look at the specifics.
The Build Back Better World Plan was created as a response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. It is yet another example of the deepening rivalry between the two superpowers. How should Singapore navigate this complex geopolitical situation?
For Singapore and our foreign policy, the existential imperative is we must make ourselves relevant.
Tourism has been thriving on the Shisha Islands in the South China Sea. China set up a city known as Sansha to administer the three islands in 2012. There's also a Navy Coast Guard unit here.
We 我们每天看着五星红旗从我们的岛上升起，我们心里踏实，感觉这片岛屿是牢牢地把握在我们的手中，对祖国和人民有个交代。
There's one problem with these displays of patriotism. China's claim to these islands is disputed by Vietnam and Taiwan. Further out in the area, China is also building military bases, reclaiming land and fishing in waters which are also claimed by the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam and Taiwan. America, on its part, has been conducting an increasing number of freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea. Analysts tracking such operations point out that they have risen from just 3 in 2016 to 10 last year. In July, the British Royal Navy's aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth joined the Freedom of Navigation operations. In August, Germany announced it was sending a warship to these waters for the first time in 2 decades.
It's actually a positive thing to have countries like the United States, like France, like the UK, like Germany, send their naval vessels into the region, because I think it helps to balance the power in the region so that no one power dominates in the region. So I don't think China or any other country or people in countries should be viewing these lawful assertions of maritime rights and freedoms as something that is aggressive or that something that will necessarily heighten tensions. But certainly I think the risk of incidents at sea with the further risk of escalation have heightened in the South China Sea, given the fact that there are so many vessels rubbing shoulders against each other in the South China Sea. So for instance, most notably, I think it was in September 2018, a Chinese warship came very close, I think it was 41 meters to the USS Decatur, which had to maneuver at the last minute to avoid collision with the Chinese warship. And these close encounters have always taken place in a situation of heightened geopolitical tensions. In that case, it was an escalating trade war.
We hope that nations will use the international sea lanes according to international law and UNCLOS and abide by that. And should incidents happen, that cool heads will prevail and they will resolve their problems peacefully.
The troubles extend beyond the South China Sea. Many trade tariffs that the Trump presidency imposed on China have not been removed. Companies like Huawei continue to be blacklisted in America, while American brands face increasing challenges in the Chinese market.
If the two superpowers can work out sufficient modus vivendi, rules of engagement, patterns and norms of behavior, so that they can compete, collaborate, contest even, that can be, in fact, a start of another golden age in the digital arena, because the cumulative weight of investment in contest and innovation will unlock tremendous bursts of creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. That's the golden scenario. The opposite scenario is that if America believes, it must win at all costs, and it must change the rules if need be, or believes that China is getting ahead purely through unfair means, that immediately erodes trust. On the other side, and here I will speak from interacting with my Chinese counterparts, if they believe that America is a declining power and it's not only their time in the sun, but that it is inevitable that they will win, we will also have a problem. I've tried to convince my Chinese friends that don't count America out. America's population may be 1/4 of China, but America's ability to attract the top talent from all over the world means the base of the American pyramid is actually far, far broader and deeper than China, so don't count them out.
America is Singapore's largest investor, and Singapore is China's largest investor. As a nation with deep ties to both countries, Singapore walks a fine line in a world of geopolitical contest.
For Singapore and our foreign policy, the existential imperative that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew has always emphasized to us is relevance. We must make ourselves relevant so that others have a stake in our success and will want us to continue succeeding. So if you look into how we have actually implemented this dictum of relevance, we have been relevant to the Americans, to their economic interests, to their defense and strategic engagement to Asia. We have been relevant to China. You look at our investments, the fact that we're now the largest foreign investor in China. If you look at Chinese companies also establishing regional or global headquarters, expanding even their digital footprints and their digital infrastructure, we have been relevant. So the point is, they all know that we have been useful, we have been relevant. But there is a difference between being useful and being made use of. You see that distinction? And I'm very, very clear in all my interactions, a lot of this is behind the scenes, that we will demonstrate relevance, we will be useful, but we will not be made use of. We will not become one or the other's stalking horse to advance negative agendas. Now, this is a difficult position to take, because it means I don't have the luxury of saying different things to the Americans on one hand and the Chinese on the other. I say exactly the same thing consistently. I also make it clear that we're not taking sides.
Welcome to all of you to the 40th IISS Fullerton Lecture.
Even in times of competition, our enduring ties in Southeast Asia are bigger than just geopolitics. As Prime Minister Lee has counseled, We are not asking countries in the region to choose between the United States and China.
Regardless of what Secretary Austin says or what some of his predecessors have said before him, that it's not asking the region to choose. I mean, the region appreciates that sentiment, of course, but it becomes increasingly difficult, and especially if we see now increased decoupling between the United States and China on economic fronts, on technological fronts. I think that becomes very difficult then, because you'll have, in essence, split trading spheres, split technology realms. And then, what happens then? I think countries, by default, in a sense, have to choose between which sphere to enter.
As politics play out in the corridors of power, Singaporeans from all walks of life continue to study and work in the United States. Olympic gold medalist Joseph Schooling has attended school in the US since he was 14. The motivating factor was the opportunity to benefit from the competitive swimming programs. Schooling trained at the Bold School in Florida and also at the University of Texas.
The atmosphere here is great. That's why the US stands out compared to every other country, because they have a winning mentality and the atmosphere is first class.
Besides his stellar sports career, Schooling is an economics major from the University of Texas in Austin. Every year, over 4,000 Singaporeans pursue higher education in the US.
People-to-people ties in any bilateral relationship between two countries is really the anchor of a relationship. Singaporeans go to the United States, to universities to study. They learn values, they learn about the technology, they learn about economic ideas. They bring it back to their countries to transform their countries.
We also benefit from great people-to-people ties. For instance, half of the current Singapore cabinet is US educated. And our companies, many of our shared values in economic prosperity mean that we can build on the 55 years of very successful bilateral relations that we have had. We can evolve and adapt and address challenges, opportunities, whether it is climate change, whether it is vaccine diplomacy, whether it is cyber defense or counter-terrorism.